What kind of person calls the police over a $79 HOA fine, then demands they block your driveway to make a point? That's the question I asked myself as I stared out my kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in my hand, watching a patrol car parked crookedly across my driveway. The morning sun glinted off its hood, where someone, probably her, had scrawled, "Pay up," in red marker. HOA Karen, all 5'2" and 300 pounds of her, stood on my lawn, arms folded, her voice a screech that could shatter glass. "You think you're above the rules, Chief?" She spat, her words dripping with venom. "I'm Lily Tran, the actual chief of police in this sleepy suburb of Willow Creek. And I dealt with murderers who had less audacity than this woman. The trouble started 3 weeks ago over a measly $79 fine for my mailbox, which was apparently half an inch too tall according to HOA bylaws. I'd laughed it off at first, thinking it was a clerical error. Who measures mailboxes with a ruler? HOA did. She'd shown up at my door with a clipboard, her floral muumuu straining at the seams, and a smirk that screamed she relished every second of her tiny fiefdom's power. "Rules are rules, Chief," she'd said, as if I hadn't spent 20 years enforcing actual laws. I paid the fine to avoid the hassle, but HOA wasn't done. She wanted submission, not just compliance. When I refused to attend her mandatory HOA meeting to discuss my non-compliant attitude, she escalated. Now here we were, with her treating my driveway like her personal stage and 2 of my own officers caught in the middle. I stepped outside, the summer heat hitting me like a slap. HOA's eyes narrowed as I approached, her chins wobbling as she launched into another tirade. "You think you're untouchable because you're the big shot chief. This is my neighborhood, and I say who parks where." The officers, Rookie Jenkins and Officer Malone, looked mortified, their radios crackling with static as they tried to reason with her. Jenkins, barely a month on the force, stammered, "Ma'am, we're just following protocol." She called in a disturbance. A disturbance? Over a paid fine. I could feel my pulse in my temples, but I kept my voice steady. "HOA, you're on my property. Move the car, or I'll have it towed." Her laugh was a hyena's cackle. "Tow it. Try it, Chief. I've got the HOA board on speed dial." The truth unraveled faster than I expected. Jenkins, bless his nervous heart, let slip that HOA had called the station claiming I'd threatened her over the fine. Threatened her. The only threat here was to my sanity. I'd never spoken to her beyond that mailbox encounter, but HOA had a knack for spinning fiction. She'd told the dispatcher I'd waved my badge around, intimidating her into retracting the fine. It was a lie so bold it almost deserved applause. I caught Malone's eye, and he gave a subtle shake of his head, confirming what I suspected. HOA had bullied them into this absurd standoff, claiming she had evidence of my misconduct. Evidence. That word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. A neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, a quiet widow who rarely left her porch, shuffled forward, clutching her phone. Her voice trembled but carried steel. "I recorded it all, Chief Tran. Last week, at the HOA meeting. HOA was bragging about framing you." The crowd, 3 nosy neighbors who'd gathered like vultures, gasped. HOA's face went from smug to ashen in a heartbeat. Mrs. Callahan held up her phone, and there it was, HOA's voice, tinny but unmistakable, boasting about teaching the chief a lesson by fabricating a threat. She'd even laughed about how easy it was to get the police to do her bidding. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. and I felt a flicker of vindication. But HOA wasn't done yet. She rounded on Mrs. Callahan, her finger jabbing like a dagger. "You traitor. You're lying to protect her." The old woman didn't flinch. And for a moment, I saw the neighborhood's quiet strength staring down its loudest tyrant. The confrontation exploded from there. HOA lunged toward Mrs. Callahan, screaming about betrayal and lawsuits. But Malone stepped in, his hand on his radio. "Ma'am, step back, or we'll have to restrain you." HOA froze, her eyes wild, realizing she'd overplayed her hand. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of my training to keep calm. "HOA, you've got two choices. Walk away now, or I'll have you arrested for filing a false report and harassment." The neighbors murmured, their phones out, recording the spectacle. HOA's bravado cracked, but she doubled down, spitting. "You can't touch me. I run this place." I leaned in, my voice low but sharp. "You run a clipboard. I run the law." Her empire crumbled in slow motion. The officers, now fully aware of HOA's lies, moved the cruiser off my driveway without another word. Jenkins apologized profusely, his face redder than the marker on the hood. Malone, more seasoned, just gave me a nod that said he'd seen this kind of nonsense before. HOA stood frozen, her fists clenched, as the neighbors' whispers grew louder. Mrs. Callahan's recording had already spread. Someone had texted it to the HOA group chat, and I could hear phones buzzing with notifications. HOA's reign of terror, built on petty fines and intimidation, was unraveling. She tried one last desperate ploy, claiming the recording was doctored, but no one was buying it. The crowd dispersed, leaving her alone on my lawn, a deflated figure shouting at no one. I could have pressed charges. Filing a false police report was a misdemeanor, and harassment could have landed her in court. But as I watched her storm off, her moo-moo flapping like a defeated flag, I realized something. HOA wasn't just a bully, she was a product of this place. This suffocating suburb where power came from control, not compassion. I'd seen it in precincts, in politics, in every corner of life where people clung to small fiefdoms to feel big. Arresting her would have been easy, but it wouldn't fix what was broken here. Instead, I called an emergency HOA meeting that night, using my authority as a resident, not a chief. The board, rattled by the recording, agreed. That evening, the community center was packed. Faces I hadn't seen in years showed up, drawn by the drama, but staying for something else. I stood at the podium, not in my uniform, but in jeans and a sweater. Just another neighbor. "We've let rules divide us," I said, my voice steady but warm. "A mailbox, a fine, a driveway. It's not about the $79. It's about what kind of community we want to be." I shared stories from my years on the force, about neighbors who'd saved each other, not torn each other down. I talked about Mrs. Callahan's courage, about how one voice could shift everything. The room was quiet, then alive with nods, murmurs, and finally, applause. HOA wasn't there. Esht resigned from the board that afternoon, citing personal reasons. But her absence wasn't the victory. The victory was the room full of people ready to rewrite the rules together. By the next week, the HOA had new leadership. Mrs. Callahan, despite her protests, was voted in as president. The bylaws were revised, prioritizing fairness over nitpicking. I got a new mailbox, one that met code but had a little engraving of a phoenix. a nod to rising above the ashes of this mess. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, like it could breathe again. I'd spent years enforcing laws, but this was the first time I'd felt like I'd helped build something better than order, hope. Standing in my driveway, now free of cruisers and marker scrawls, I realized that sometimes the smallest battles over $79, a mailbox, or a bully could spark the biggest change. End.